I'm not aware. I think I've heard of a company who may be only selling information to, for example, I don't know if they're selling it, but I think they might have an arrangement with it. So Progressive Insurance has the thing where you can plug into the OBD port their own device. And I think some manufacturers are at least potentially thinking about allowing a consumer to choose to just directly share the information with an insurance company with choice. So essentially they'd have to opt in affirmatively to such a sharing arrangement. Not sure if that's in place now or not.
Yeah, I mean, the answer to your question is no, unless there is some specific opt-in application that is very limited nature, if it exists at all. The companies are quite clear, in addition to the privacy principles, they are not selling the data.
Okay, and that's, yes, then Mr. Porter?
I agree with that same statement. We're not selling any of the information to third party without an affirmative consent.
Again, and the affirmative consent is based upon at the time of purchase of the vehicle or time of purchase of, if you will, an add-on or somewhere down the road. For example, with Progressive Insurance, when would the request or the inquiry be made as to if the purchaser of the car would like to have Progressive Insurance?
It's at the time of the subscription of the service. It would be at the time of the subscription of the service, and if a consumer decided at some point that they wanted to discontinue the service, then the information would no longer be collected as well.
I think Mr. Tobin may mention this, that there is going to be a variety of ways that manufacturers may decide to acquire affirmative consent. It could be at the point of sale for the vehicle. It could be at the point of where there's subscription service. It could even be at the vehicle level where when you first key cycle your car to cut it on, and you'll have a screen that comes up and says that, in order to use this particular function, that little screen right there, the onboard screen right there, there's that aspect of it. They can even communicate with you if you decide and give a consent to your mobile device, even because some vehicles actually have remote capabilities in the devices that communicate with you as well. So, Senator Jackson, there is a variety of means that manufacturers can communicate and ask for affirmative consent. So there is no sort of cut and bite. And I think, and frankly, I think most of the manufacturers in their plans want to have it as a warm consent. It isn't that you sign a piece of paper at the point of sale. They actually want to once again, because they want to create a relationship with their customer, to actually do it in a way that actually is meaningful. And that's something that Tim was talking about as well. Well, frankly, the Federal Trade Commission is encouraging that type of activity generally, not only in our space, but frankly in other application spaces as well.
And is there anything included in that warm request that says, and we do not share this information with anyone else? And, or that this information, we need this information in order to provide this product?
Well, the principles would require affirmative consent based on a prominent, clear, meaningful notice to the individual. So I'm not sure.
I'm going to defer to others. I'm not going to get my answer, I don't think, and maybe it's because I'm not asking the question well. So let's see if perhaps Senator Monning can, and then perhaps Senator Bates, and if I feel compelled to ask it another way, I will do that. Otherwise, we'll move on. Thank you. Senator Monning.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to thank the co-chairs and staff for organizing what I think is an important and timely informational hearing. I carried legislation in 2014, SB 994, that met certain resistance from auto manufacturers. And at the time, we were told in many different forums that the industry did not collect or store data on geolocations or biometrics. And it seems like that position has changed since our hearings of 2014. And well, before I pose my question, I do want to preface my question by saying the complexity of this needs to be respected. The safety protections that can be provided by some of the computers on wheels, let me acknowledge that. The safety potential, repair, maintenance of vehicles. But again, I think the focus of today's hearing is how our privacy information is captured and potentially shared. So the recent example of an insurance company maybe seeking an opt-in from an insurance client to be able to capture data from your car, not involving the manufacturer necessarily, but a third party that may not have a good system of notice, transparency, and opt-in, but rather when you're signing up for the less expensive insurance, you have inadvertently agreed for them to track data from your car. So again, I think there's a slippery slope here. The assurances that the auto manufacturers do not seek to sell data that is collected. It's been a gold mine for other platforms. On our cell phones, on apps, every step of the way we're asked to give permission to share our data, and often, and sometimes to sell it. So does the agreement, the MOU, affirm that the auto manufacturers who are parties to this agreement will not sell to third parties?
The privacy principles?
Yes.
Yeah, they have a firm commitment that the automakers will not share any driver behavior, geolocation, or biometric information with an unaffiliated third party without affirmative opt-in consent from the user.
And that's specified in the MOU. Were there consumer advocates who were party to those discussions?
Yes.
Who were the consumer advocates?
There was a number of them.
The industry took these around in a draft form and met with various stakeholders, including, we met with the ACLU, we met with
Consumers Federation of America, we met with Consumers Union, we met with actually ACLU.
Center for Democracy.
Good, that's helpful. So, and I think it was Mr. Carlson who suggested, and one of the challenges we faced a couple years ago was the potential challenge of a patchwork of different state regulations, and that at the federal level we can have uniformity. Is there any talk of converting this MOU into statute, into law, so that consumers have the protection of law as opposed to an MOU among auto manufacturers?
Well, Senator, I think that to explain the principles enforcement mechanism, by the very fact that the manufacturers, by adopting the principles, they have actually opened themselves up to Federal Trade Commission enforcement for violations of Section 5. So this isn't an MOU. This is actually a document where if you do not hold yourself accountable to the principles that you signed on for, you can face fairly significant fines from the Federal Trade Commission. So the document is frankly more than just a promise.
So it's enforceable.
It is enforceable
by federal.
Absolutely right.
Transportation Commission, Trade Commission?
Trade.
Although,
Does an individual consumer have recourse if they determine that these principles have been violated?
There isn't a private right of action within the Federal Trade Commission. However, the principles do create a foundational floor where if there is an abuse, and there's the many state attorney, there's many FTC acts in the states which may have possibilities for consumer action. So it's a different answer depending upon the state. But generally speaking, you can use a cause of action in a class action suit that you have that as something has been violative of the principles, and then yes, that could be a cause of action individually. But can a consumer, through the Federal Trade Commission, have a cause of action? No, that is not how that works.
And back to the insurance question, will insurance companies provide lower rates to customers if they opt in to share their data from their car computer with the insurance company?
My understanding of, I only know of Progressive, and yes, they incent people that if you decide to use what's called the onboard diagnostics port, or OBD, you put a little dongle in that port which tracks your speed and everything else. And in exchange, yes, they will provide you a lower rate, but they also are monitoring your driving behavior. But that is a quid pro quo for the Progressive product. I'm not sure of the others.
Thank you. And again, I'm aware others may have questions. Let me just final area. So I buy a new car, I get provided options to opt in for, and will there be layers for can I opt in just for capture data for maintenance and good operations of my vehicle versus, but still protecting that being shared with third parties?
Yes, you can, Senator. And actually, to go back to Senator Jackson's question, I really hate to disappoint you and not be able to answer your question. I have a real-world scenario. I recently bought a brand-new vehicle, which was a plug-in hybrid, so it has a more advanced suite of things. The company that I bought my vehicle from made an affirmative statement. We will, if you consent to buy this vehicle and for this, we will use it only for the purposes of, for you to be able to locate a charging station. We will not sell this information to any other party. So while it isn't embedded in the principles, once again, it's going to be the choices of individual manufacturers to be able to make these clear, declarative statements of how you're going to use your data.
But that was a voluntary decision of the manufacturer.
Yeah, that was a voluntary decision. Once again, how they implemented the principles,
Right.
and they made particular decisions on the decision that we're going to collect information. We're going to explain to the customer that purchases this vehicle, we will use this information in this way, but we promise you we will not use the information in that way. And if they do that, or if they violate it, it's actionable with the FTC.
And a final question then, if you will, related to this. I purchased the new vehicle. I opt in. I offer the consent as the purchaser. I sell that car on the private market as a used vehicle. What happens to that new owner of the ar?
That is one of the limitations of the principles, in that it really does only go to the first owner of the vehicle in terms of, because that frankly, the beyond this actionable reason why is, it is very difficult, almost impossible for the manufacturer to be able to find out who the new owner is and establish that relationship. It's something I know that manufacturers are thinking about and trying to figure out ways to do that, but Senator, it's hard. And that's the reason why the principles don't go to that extent.
But if they're doing a retina scan, presumably they'll know it's not me driving it's the new owner.
Well, I think, companies, when they do learn that ownership is transferred, they would, if they didn't already stop services before, they would.
Well, and
Or
that's,
since it's only an MOU, they can change it at any time, and they can come to you again, and they can say, we said we weren't going to do that, but now we have a new program, and we want to offer that to you as an opt-in, but if you don't opt in, then we won't provide it. In other words, there's still a lot of flexibility and fluidity, because this is done sort of voluntarily and not anything that is written sort of in a...
that's true, but the MOU is a guideline on how to operate. There's a contract between the customer and the company that's based on that understanding.
Enforceable by whom?
By the FTC.
So if I have a complaint, I go to the FTC, and they're going to go ahead and file a complaint against you based upon my limited experience? I mean, have they done that at any point?
They do pay attention to consumer complaints, maybe not one complaint, but if a number of consumers are upset about what's going on, they will often, look into issues further.
Okay, Senator Bates, thank you. And then we have another panel, perhaps, that will continue the conversation there. And I appreciate, Mr. Strickland, your effort to answer my question. I think you have kind of, I'm not totally sure. But go ahead, Senator Bates.
Yes, a little concerned about the privacy, because I have a situation in my car where it came with certain special things like a Sirius radio. I chose not to extend it past the 6 months, and now they're stalking me. And they've actually, they turned it off, and now it's back on, and I never paid a dime. So they at least know the radio is in my car, and I'm wondering if I sell it to John, will they be after him too? I don't know. But my concern is the safety issues and the fact that those sometimes override the discretion of the driver. I also have that in my car, and when it decides that I'm going to run into something in front of me, the camera is picking up the wrong angle. The first time it happened, the car was new, and it startled me because an alarm thing goes off in the car. I actually was just coming around a curve, so the camera picked up a tree and a median, but I'm going the right way. The other thing is when I'm very close to the car in front of me, like on the freeway, it'll sound an alarm that I'm too close to the car in front of me, but because the speeds have changed, I'm starting to brake, but before I put that brake on, this thing goes off. It's very distracting. I'm concerned that I think those are good things when we have the safety issues that will warn drivers. But when they're going to override the driver's discretion and judgment, and I think that might be at times more perfect than these new systems because they're going to be experimental to begin with. A lot of attention needs to be paid before they're installed, you know, just generally in every car. I'm not sure they're going to work, especially with younger drivers, new drivers. So I hope the whole science is paying attention to that, because overriding a judgment of a person that's actually in the situation with some camera that may not have the same depth perception and all that we have as humans is of concern, and I've already experienced it. That's why I bring it up.
Well, Senator, I'll two things. First, as a plug for my former agency, we have a thing called, there's a website called safercar.gov where you can actually fill out a complaint form to the agency discussing these issues, because some of those things, what it sounds like, could possibly pose an unreasonable safety risk, and that's something that they collect information from consumers and owners and drivers like you and then go back and investigate to see if that's the case. So please take the opportunity to do that, which is helpful. Active safety systems have tremendous promise, but like in any implementation, sometimes there are issues that get worked out over time. I wouldn't call it experimental. These companies work very, very hard to make sure that these systems work perfectly. But on occasion, you do get experiences, and I know when I was in office, there was a vehicle that read a bridge plate as a vehicle and went into a very hard G stop in the middle of an expressway. That vehicle was investigated, it was recalled, and that was fixed. So while yes, we are working through, you know, these onesies, twosies, the great promise of active safety systems for safety, as you said, Senator, is huge. But I appreciate your comments about your experience. I would definitely say go to safercar.gov.
And I wonder, Dr. Schladover, as the safety expert, could you respond to Senator Bates's concern?
Yeah.
And then we'll be done with this panel. Thank you.
This is a subject of a lot of active research and a great deal of development effort within the industry. In most cases, these systems are designed to be very conservative. In other words, they won't put on the brakes until the very last minute to try to minimize the amount of untoward events like the one you experienced. And those will continue to improve. But the major thing to keep in mind is, for the vast majority of the cases, they are actually helping to improve safety. Even though they're not perfect, they're still going to help you avoid more crashes than they're going to cause. But perfection takes a long time.
Thank you very much. Thank you, gentlemen, very much for your, yes, last comment, Mr.
Yes, on a couple of little points, I want to provide some clarity. First off, there's been some discussion about the insurance services that are offered and how that all happens. Those are not things that our companies are doing. Those are services that are provided by insurance companies, and how they gain access to that is through the onboard diagnostics port, which is typically under the steering wheel of the car. That is a government-mandated program that's primary goal is to monitor and control the emission control systems on the vehicles. Repairers use that technology by plugging a device into the car to track all that. That also gathers information that is mandated by both the federal and state governments to do that. So this thing that we're somehow colluding with insurance companies to provide this data, this is this device has been mandated on every vehicle sold in the United States since 1996. Its whole purpose is to be an open system for folks to gather that information. And so there's not, you know, it just was kind of, the conversation was sort of left that we had some sort of special relationship. You can purchase the $30 maintenance device right now, and within 15 seconds of plugging that device in your car, you can have the entire vehicle history data on your cell phone. I mean, that's the openness nature of it. Again, it's a government-mandated program. And then finally, there was some discussion about the data tracking that Senator Monning had rightfully asked about, trying to find that. Virtually all of these services that it's talking about are paid services. So when the vehicle is sold, if the new owner does not continue to purchase that, there's going to have to be a new relationship with that service, because somebody else is now writing the check. So that's really another check of that opt-in or opt-out thing. I just wanted to bring that point in, and thank you for the indulgence.
Thank you, gentlemen. And clearly we are just at the beginning of this frontier, and appreciate your time and testimony today. We are going to have the second panel come up. I recognize we are running behind, and I apologize We have Samantha Corbin, Dr. Jeremy Galula, Mr. Michael Belote, Mr. Dennis Montalbo, I'm sorry, I didn't get that right. Montalbano. Bud Rice, Robert Ayers, Aaron Lowe, and Catherine, is it pronounced Seek? Okay. Very good. And let's start with Samantha Corbin, who is the CEO of Corbin and Kaiser on behalf of the Privacy Rights Clearinghouse, and Dr. Galula with the Electronic Frontier Foundation. I think if you've been indulging us, you know that the whole issue of privacy is really critically important, as well as safety. But if you could try to assist us in addressing this issue, because I think the privacy aspects of this remain a little bit unclear, at least they do to me, and but of great concern. So, Ms. Corbin, if you'd like to proceed.
Sure, and just so the members know, and first, thank you, Ms. Chairman, for putting together this event today. We're very excited to be participating. We also represent the Electronic Frontier Foundation, and unfortunately, Dr. Galula is sick today, so I'll also be covering his statements as well as mine, in addition to attempting to answer some of the previously asked questions and respond to some of our colleagues earlier in the previous panel. As you've heard today, telematics services have a tremendous power to collect and intercept private information, and our automakers and their third-party affiliates are granting themselves the authority to collect and use this information as they see fit. I thought it would be appropriate, given some of the comments, I actually have an excerpt from the terms of service in my car, which I just purchased recently, that might illuminate some of the type of, quote, affirmative consent that consumers are obligated to when they purchase a vehicle. And I quote directly, "We, any of the automakers, companies, and or other service partners may retrieve, access, and or use any of the information, including, without any limitation, location information, recorded, transmitted, or otherwise obtained in connection therewith at any time for any reason," which is pretty broad. And the affirmative consent that I opted into on this agreement was simply purchasing my car. At the time, I was also provided with a navigational service similar to an OnStar, but not an OnStar, and had a temporary period of which I could use it. And when I decided to opt out of that service, it took me, and given what I do, this is alarming, 2 hours, 4 websites, 2 phone calls, and over 50 pages of reading to both understand what I had affirmatively opted into by way of purchasing my car and how I could opt out of it. That also included having to sign into my own cell phone provider account, which had been, without my knowledge, already linked to the services provided through my car. When I opted out, I spent 30 minutes on the phone with the service provider for my automaker, and I was forced to listen to several disclaimers about how opting out would likely damage my safety if I was in an accident, that I must agree on recording to hold my automaker harmless for any harm done to me by way of opting out of tracking services. And I attempted not to relinquish them of any liability or even offer a recorded statement. Was told I could not opt out unless I did so. So that was, again, just my experience, but I think it speaks very clearly to the idea of consent. Our colleagues in the previous panel spoke quite a bit about choice and privacy and consent and the importance of maintaining consumer trust. However, I would counter on behalf of our clients that much of what they were talking about is the perception of privacy, the perception of choice, and the perception of consent. As automakers expand the scope of connected cars, and this becomes commonplace in all vehicles, consumers will actually have no choice if they purchase a new vehicle other than to purchase one that offers these services. In order to be meaningful, consent has to be informed and optional. And I would counter that in these cases, and soon to be, it will not be for any drivers. So let's talk about the technologies themselves and some of the significant implications for consumers as well as constitutional privacy rights. This includes these services have the capacity to track individuals across multiple locations, collect behavioral and locational information, and then use, analyze, share, or sell it for other consideration, which I would counter is likely what our automakers and their third-party affiliates are in fact doing. Rather than selling, they're sharing for other considerations data amongst each other. Again, in my personal experience, my cell phone and all of the data collected therein had already been linked to my account with my automaker. Information about a person's movements can reveal an enormous amount about a person's personal, social, and political activities. The types of location-based services that collect and store vast quantities of locational information for further analysis make them a perfect mass surveillance tool. This should not be left unchecked in a democratic society. And as telematics becomes standard in new automobiles, we must ensure that consumers possess a right to travel without being coerced into revealing their location or other sensitive information by way of a non-optional affirmative consent to purchase a vehicle. Aside from that, however, there are security and safety issues associated with all of this data that's being transferred between cars. So I'll read again from the same terms of service that I quoted earlier. Because we provide our services through wireless networks, your communications may be intercepted by others. We and our service partners, including, for example, telecommunications carriers and other wireless service carriers, cannot and do not guarantee, and we and our partners expressly disclaim the security and privacy of wireless transmissions, and we will not be liable for them or any lack of security relating to the use of service by you or your vehicle. You agree that you will not hold us or any of our service partners or companies liable for any damages resulting from any loss of privacy or security occurring in connection with any communications over such networks. Again, this is the actual terms of service from the vehicle I just purchased. Given the sensitivity of geolocational and biometrics information coupled with other personally identifiable information, this is gravely concerning, but the safety issues are more disturbing. Many of you may remember, and I think it was referenced in the policy paper last summer, when a pair of security researchers demonstrated how they could hack into and disable remotely over the internet a Jeep. Fortunately, those researchers shared their findings with Chrysler prior to publishing their work, and Chrysler ensured a fix was ready before the researchers went public. Unfortunately, not all automakers act so quickly. Last September, Wired reported on a full takeover hack, which UC San Diego and University of Washington researchers disclosed to them in 2010. It took that automaker over 5 years to prepare a patch, which meant that for 5 years, millions of cars were vulnerable to an attack. Without notice to consumers. Such a slow pace at fixing safety issues is unconscionable. Let's see, other concerns that we have from a policy standpoint is what happens to these vehicles once they are no longer supported by the manufacturer? What happens when a vehicle no longer receives a security update and therefore may be even more susceptible to hackers and other problems associated with vehicle security? And I can close out here quickly. I think consumers need a way to opt out of data collection, not just sharing, but data collection in the first place, potentially at a granular level. In the same way that your browser has an incognito or private browsing mode, shouldn't our vehicles have a mode that allows us to drive somewhere without being tracked? If I can browse a political or religious website from home without saving a history of it on my computer, why shouldn't I be able to drive to a rally or attend a religious service without my car saving a similar history? And in the same way, the choice needs to be the one the user can make with informed consent and in real time, not after the fact opt out of a marketing program. When an automaker sells a vehicle with a telematics system, they need to publicly commit to how long the vehicle software will receive security updates and have a plan for how the vehicle will be kept safe once those updates are no longer rolled out. One option is to disable the telematics system after the vehicle no longer receives updates. A better option from a technologist point of view and that of many of our clients would be to publish the specifications and the protocols the system uses or the source code of the software so that the amateur and open source communities can analyze and patch the software or create new software. My colleagues in the auto community will argue that this in and of itself is a safety concern and they are the only ones who can preserve the safety of consumers. However, I would counter that such transparency would not only enhance the security and promote innovation. It would, in addition, also address other issues related to consumer rights, such as the right to repair their own vehicle, select their own automotive repair, or to select other third-party services that may be non-proprietary to the automaker themselves.